In terms of electricity, Madam Speaker, the JPS has reported that it has supplemented its resource pool with former employees as well as engaging local contractors from the bauxite industry assigned to Hanover and St. Elizabeth. In addition, the company is currently engaging CARILEC, that is the Caribbean Electric Utility Services Corporation, CARILEC, to provide support resources in the coming days. We should be getting line workers from countries such as Belize and Cayman who will help JPS to address the outage pockets that exist within the island. Overall, power has been restored to approximately 655,000 customers, which represents 94.6% of the customer base of the country. I need to say this. I want to say this again. Overall, power has been restored to approximately 655,000 customers, which represents 94.6% of the customer base. Madam Speaker, we can only report what the utility company has reported to us. To be clear, Madam Speaker, we do not just accept what is given to us. I am certain that Minister Vaz has interrogated this figure. But it is important that we understand what the figure is saying. What this figure is saying is that the customer base, meaning those persons who have an account with the JPS, that it has been returned. It might be a surprise to many, Madam Speaker, when we start to look at magnitude, that St. Elizabeth itself accounts for approximately 5% of the customer base. And that is a challenge, Madam Speaker. So the customer base is highly concentrated in Kingston and St. Andrew, Spanish Town, Portmore, St. James. So that's and that is because of the urban nature of electricity usage. So, Madam Speaker, this is not to say that there are not significant areas that are without electricity. And I want that to be reconciled in the presentation. Right? So for context, the broader parish of St. Elizabeth only represents 5% of the total customer base. And that should give, a reasonable expectation in terms of how the return of electricity, Madam Speaker, will be effective. Now, power has been restored to all major hospitals, and the restoration to critical NWC sites is approximately 81% complete as of July 16th, today's date. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to report that power has been restored to approximately 49% of customers in St. Elizabeth. Key areas restored include sections of Black River, Junction, Alligator Pond, Santa Cruz, Silo, Lacovia, Eldersley, and Top Hill. The JPS has indicated that they are targeting the week ending August 10th for full restoration island-wide. Well, remember last week, Madam Speaker, the JPS had given us a target date, which we all questioned as to whether or not it was feasible. So the new target date to have everything completed would be August 10th. But, Madam Speaker, I think we should look at the overall picture. And we were given some targets that obviously were ambitious. But generally, Madam Speaker, 10 days after a hurricane, to be at 94% is a significant achievement. There are other countries, Madam Speaker, which would have gotten hit by a Category 1 hurricane, and there are still complaints of over 500,000 customers without electricity. So this is not in any way to diminish the frustration that persons who are without electricity have. But I think in general we need to moderate the expectations of immediate return, because, Madam Speaker, there are some challenges that we need to account for when we are building out our expectation for the return of electricity. For example, if it rains, the linemen will not be able to work in this kind of weather. So they may lose a day or two. Madam Speaker, there are poles in certain locations which are unsafe to treat with. So they may have to realign poles because of land slippage, other broken infrastructure. That makes it more difficult. I see you have the gavel at ready, Madam Speaker.
House Leader, Prime Minister's time for speaking has expired.
Madam Speaker, the member's time having been expired for speaking, I beg to move that it be extended by half an hour so as to allow him to complete the presentation. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
House, the question is that the Prime Minister's time be extended by 30 minutes to allow for completion of the statement by Minister. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, the point that I was making, and thank you for the extension, is that the JPS, in trying to complete the restoration, is facing some challenges that are not all exclusively within their domain or control. And therefore, Madam Speaker, there may need to be greater exercise of patience in the return. But having said that, Madam Speaker, in Manchester, in Duff House, Alligator Pond, Moorlands Housing Scheme, and these areas and Spaldings, we have restored electricity in these areas in Manchester. In Clarendon, sections of Lionel Town, Mitchell Town, Rocky Point, and Portland Cottage have been restored, and the target for full restoration in those areas would be the end of July. We are aware of reports about unscrupulous individuals pretending to be JPS workers and requesting the communities pay money for their power to be restored. This is totally unacceptable. We want to remind our citizens that this is unsafe, illegal, and unethical, and poses a threat to lives and property, and indeed to the legitimate JPS crews that are working to restore electricity. We are also aware that some persons are demonstrating because of the delay in getting back their electricity. We understand your frustration, and we are doing everything to get you your electricity as quickly as possible. But the demonstrations, Madam Speaker, will not help. The demonstrations could potentially delay restoration efforts in your communities. as, of course, blocked roads impede access. And there are also safety concerns, as JPS employees could be exposed to violence and confrontations in communities where persons are protesting. So we know, Madam Speaker, it is inconvenient to be without the electricity service. But again, I ask for patience. JPS is doing everything to get your power back as soon as possible. And Madam Speaker, the government is not just merely taking the word of JPS. I know Minister Vaz has been very stringent, that's the word I would use, in his oversight of the JPS. And the government has done all that it can to ensure coordination with the various agencies and entities to ensure that the JPS has access to areas where their poles have been damaged, but there is also infrastructure damage that would inhibit them from making progress. Madam Speaker, in terms of water, approximately 464,000 customers out of the NWC's 546,000.
Would you be so kind as to turn
Presentation.
off your mic? Hold on a moment, please. Prime Minister. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Prime Minister has given an overview of the current situation, which is an evolving situation as further assessments are being done. It is clear that Jamaica has sustained a severe hit, especially in certain parishes which were particularly exposed, the southern coast in particular, but also even some of the parishes on the north coast got severe damage as well. Prime Minister, the lessons to be learned from this are very important because we are in an era of global warming and the conditions on Earth are such that it is expected that we will see more of these kind of severe weather events. And of course, this particular hurricane was unusual insofar as it intensified more rapidly than has been seen before and is earlier in the season than we've ever seen before for a hurricane of that intensity. So we need to learn from what has taken place and prepare for what may come in the future. So one thing I would say, though, to begin with, Prime Minister, is that I'm a little distrustful of the data, or I wouldn't say distrustful, skeptical is a better word, skeptical of the data on the extent of the recovery that has so far been achieved. The reason being that when you're looking at percentages of customers who are once again being served, it isn't that meaningful, given that as a percentage of the overall customer base, given that the major population centers of the country were relatively unscathed by this hurricane. But in large swathes of communities in parishes across Jamaica, people are still without electricity and many are without water. I mean, in our own assessments that we were submitting today through the opposition spokesperson for energy, you know, the list of communities that are still without water is extensive, and without light, it's extensive. And I noticed that you said, well, sections of this community or that community, light has been restored, but there are many sections of those communities which are still not yet having light. So I think we don't want to overplay the extent of the recovery, because for people on the ground who are seeing, you know, the extent to which people are still without light, it's kind of grating to hear these very generous numbers, 90-odd% and so on, you know, when people are seeing so many communities and so many homes still without light. I just want to make that point. In terms of resilience, Prime Minister, we need to, I think, hear from the JPS as to what their plans are to make their distribution system more resilient. I mean, there were many instances of posts and poles that were damaged, not because of tree damage or whatever reason. Maybe they weren't sufficiently anchored in the ground, they snapped for whatever reason. You know, if they're going to be drawing down on funds, as I understand it, there's a disaster fund that is accessible to the JPS for restoration of the damage. There's a portion of self-insurance that they have to pick up, but above that, there's a fund that the OUR, basically 50 million US, is the amount of that fund. Now, we want to make sure that that fund is funded by customers. That is funded by rates that people pay over time. So we want to make sure that those resources are used in a way that will maximize resilience going forward. Yeah. That's very important, you know, so that when the next severe breeze blow comes, we don't have the extensive damage that we had this time. And because that 50 million, of course, to the extent it's drawn down now, it will take some time to replenish because it has built up over years. Right? So we need to be very judicious in how we use those resources, JPS in particular. Prime Minister, the resilience of the National Water Commission's distribution system, the pumping stations, and you know, one of the lessons from this is how important it is that the key elements in the distribution system have backup power. You know, while we're drawing down on insurance resources or quasi-insurance resources through the CRIF and the funds that have been set aside out of the budget, these are the kind of expenditures which we should be putting in place to make sure that when this happens again, the water supply is not adversely affected in the way it is now by electricity not being available, because those key pumping stations across the country have their own backup. And those need to be adequately scoped and spec'd. I was checking out for an overseas group of Jamaicans who are interested in helping with this in St. Elizabeth. You know, what would be the necessary scope for a generator for one of the major pumping stations. And of course, when you looked at it, it's very technical as to what the needs are. So we need to make sure that that work is done so that the right things are purchased and will be effective going forward. Prime Minister, similarly, health facilities. One, it's kind of shocking to hear that so many of our health facilities, residential and other health facilities, when I say residential, i.e. with beds for inpatients, are without backup power supply. You know, that is another area where this is an opportunity to remedy that. And that we would love to see, as much as possible, that all our health facilities are provided with backup generators that are adequately scoped so that they can continue to serve patients even after a disaster such as this. So urgency is critical at this time, Prime Minister, and you know, I'm glad to hear that there will be linesmen coming. You mentioned Belize and Cayman to help the JPS. I think the Minister of Energy had mentioned to us in a conversation, possibly Guyana as well, and I think he mentioned one other territory, and possibly the US. You know, the next few weeks, you know, the longer that this absence of electricity continues, the greater the agony and the greater the frustration of the people who are living without it, especially when they know so many other people have light and they don't get it yet. So we really need to intensify the effort to restore the electricity system as quickly as possible.
Is that mic now for member from Southwest? Clarendon Southwest?
All right, so thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Prime Minister, for your statement earlier. My questions are really around the issues surrounding the Jamaica Public Service Company and the Water Commission. So as it relates to the Jamaica Public Service Company, I noticed that some communities were mentioned here, parts of Lionel Town, Rocky Point, Mitchelltown. So far, Ali is without electricity.
Member, you have to ask a question.
I'm asking a question, Madam
No,
Speaker.
member. So it's not a long speech. You have
Madam
to go
Speaker,
to question.
I am not making a long speech.
Go ahead. I'm going to listen to your member. Get to your question.
There are communities that are without electricity. And the question is how soon these communities will have electricity. And I'm listing the communities so that the Prime Minister can give me a proper response. Water Lane, Race Course, Alley, all of Milk River, Banks, Kempshill. all of Milk River will include Sedge Pond, Springfield, Clifton, Farka Beach, Rest. None of these communities are with electricity. Farka Beach. Farka Beach. My other question is about the generator program which you announced earlier. And it's important because I think it's a good program. But my question is, how soon can we get one for Kemsil? And the reason for the question is this. And the member from Southeast Clarendon can confirm that many of the communities in Southeast Clarendon depend on the facility in Kemsil. Rocky Point depends on the facility. Portland Cottage depends on that facility. So the question is, how soon can we get one of these generators? And the reason I ask the question, Prime Minister, is that we have made attempts to get a generator. So, have you received any information from the Water Commissioner as to the specs of some of these facilities? Because we are told that Kemsil requires a 450 kV. So the question is, what are the specs on the generators that you say that we are going to roll out for these 300 facilities? Because not every single facility utilizes the same capacity in terms of voltage. So those are my questions, Prime Minister. Thank you.
Prime Minister, you have two members to respond to, and then two more.
The JPS. I think that needs to be said. I think I need to say that clearly. The JPS is a private company. The government has, I believe, 20% shares, but it is a private company. I am merely giving a report that has been given to me and which would have been reviewed by the minister, who I know has been very meticulous in going through it. But I do sympathize with the sentiments expressed, both on this side and on that side. And indeed, the skepticism is shared, because when I travel, for example, I was in Hanover and parts of Westmoreland, there are communities without electricity. And it doesn't always square up with the overall numbers that are given. But I always have to try and reconcile, because it is two different bases of judgment that is being used. One is customer, and the other is consumer. And these are two different bases for making assessments. So in terms of the consumers, I would suspect that there is a large number of consumers who are without electricity. And many of those would be not in urban areas, but in many of the rural communities. And I think that is where the real challenge is right now. So the strategic focus of the JPS, as I'd mentioned last week, was to restore their transmission lines. I believe they have successfully done that. And then to restore their major distribution lines to the large areas where their customer base is. And I believe they have successfully done that. And then they made a special program to target the parish of St. Elizabeth and other pockets that are without. So they are in their third phase now, which is to target St. Elizabeth in particular and pockets that are without. So I think it might be a little bit unfair at this moment to critique them on it, because they did lay out a plan and they did say that within this week they would be in their third phase. So by next week we should be able to, I would say, be more strident in our critique if they have not lived up to the commitments that they have made. But they are now in the third phase, and in the third phase, there will be the assistance from our regional partners to help us to restore electricity. So I'm expecting that we will see a faster pace in reaching to some of the communities that are without. But the communities that have been raised by the member from Southwest Clarendon, I have noted them: Water Lane, Racecourse Alley, Milk River, Farker Beach, and you had said Kempshill. I'm going to pursue these to see if some greater effort can be made to bring electricity to them. Just to repeat, however, that it is not just the restoration of the main transmission line, the power stations, and the major distribution. Sometimes it is circuitry. A transformer is blown, a switch is blown, and they have to go around and do those individual things. That may take some time. All right. In terms of the program to build resilience, so it's really two programs. The first one is we're hiring 50 generators that we will use in a kind of mobile supply. And yes, you have mentioned 450 kVA. Most of them would be between 400 and probably higher kVA, triple phase electricity. And the challenge is that many of the rural communities now don't have triple phase. Some of them don't even have, reliable electricity to drive. So they are being properly specced. And as a leader of the opposition, I'd said it's a very technical area. And I happen to know as well because some of these matters came to my attention when they were trying to identify the right generator. So the technical people are guiding the process, so I'm expecting that there shouldn't be great problems with the deployment. But in terms of the building out of the resilience, it is something that the government is committed to, which is why we have scoped it. It is not going to be practical to put a standby generator at every pump. The cost benefit might not be there. But certainly for high population areas, high consumption areas, those areas will have standing backup electricity generation capabilities. Oh, and just to be clear, Madam Speaker, for the housing program, to repeat, not everyone who has suffered damage will get a benefit. The benefit will be based on need assessment, and merit. There are some criteria immediately that we could note that, a certain income level, which we are not going to hear defined, should not really be relying on the public purse, because that would be depriving somebody who really don't have the resources. So I think we can all agree on that.
Prime Minister, the JPS, and you just now mentioned that they are a private entity. But at points when we have emergencies like this, I'm sure that the government can mandate, because it is the worst customer service that customers are getting in a state of emergency like this. And when you have constituents calling, trying to get information, and there's no information coming, then their blood starts to run hot.
I want to question how JPS assesses percentage of customers restored. If it is starting from a position of all the customers in the country, to include those who did not lose power, then you're giving a false statement, in my opinion. It must be percentage of all of whom would have lost current, right? So if you start there with the 100%, I guarantee you wouldn't be at 96 or 92 or anywhere near there at this time. And that's important. I will have to reiterate, Prime Minister, I called a regional manager in St. Catherine, and he was so absolutely rude to me that, believe me, I had to tell him my mind, because I had to tell him my mind, because I had to remind him that the people elected me to represent them and that he was there to serve the people. So I am just asking that you try to find a way to get JPS to understand that they are at the mercy of the people who support them and cause them to have their jobs in the first place. And I must, Prime Minister, lay on the record that nobody has gone to Edward Peace, Arcas Hall, Rencom, New Road, Zion Hill, Bamboo Corner, Sandy Hill, St. Faith's, Ashley, Mount Matthews, and Bamboo. And I can tell you, if you're a female who is over 50 and you're in those communities right now, not even a fan you don't have, and if you do open the windows, mosquito killing you. It is a disgrace for me that we didn't even get the brunt of the storm. I understand St. Elizabeth. I understand what is happening down on the South Coast. But in our areas where we didn't get severe damage, it is unacceptable that our people would have to go through this. The misery index is high, Prime Minister, and it is going to reflect on all of us. I'm begging you. JPS waited now 14 days. We are now hearing that we are going to need additional help. When they started out by telling all of Jamaica that they didn't need any help, that they had enough human resource, that they had enough equipment. That's what they told us. And so I told my people, be calm, be cool, everything will soon be all right. It is not all right. They are short-staffed. They laid off most of their contractors. And one person is covering several communities across constituencies. And they're now juggling which area they should go to. Yes? Somebody called them and tell them, go over there, so them gone. They weren't finished with what they were doing over there, so them gone, leave over there. So somebody said, me offer you one little money, them gone. It is unacceptable. And there has to be a better way to serve our people.
Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me identify with the passion and the statement by the member from Northwest St. Catherine. North Central St. Catherine. And let me start by saying that I have received, whilst you were speaking, a further update on the electricity supply situation in Clarendon. One of the challenges that they have raised is that they will have to redesign and realign some of their wiring and their pathways, because some of the wires run through swampy areas which they cannot access at this moment. So that would account for some of the delays that the parish of Clarendon is experiencing. But as it relates to what you have mentioned, which is the customer service and their communication, that we will address that. We have addressed the issue of the manpower by getting manpower from overseas, and so that hopefully should improve. But it raises the bigger question, as I've said, that we're going to need to take a kind of strategic review of the operations of the JPS in this time of crisis. So I'm going to address that part of it. There are many questions that have been raised about, the age of poles, the overgrowth of trees in proximity. All of those are issues that we need to take a second look at to make sure that we are not caught by any of those issues. What was the other question? I think I've answered your question. Good.